is offered as a general source of information only. Contents are not intended as a solicitation to buy or sell specific investments or to provide tax, legal, or investment advice. Always seek advice on your specific circumstances from your financial advisor. Views of guest speakers may not be shared by Cory Vance or Arctic Fox Financial, Inc. Welcome back to Open Office Hours. If you don't know, Open Office Hours is just a real casual way for you, the listener, the viewer, to get a chance to see behind the scenes, to see someone like me, a financial advisor, someone like me, a business coach, is very approachable and a regular person, a real person, if you will. Someone that you can approach and ask your questions and get guidance from if that's what you're looking for. Or hopefully, at the very least, you'll be entertained by something I say or the way I say it or the way I look, maybe. But I really just want to offer a chance for you, the viewer or the listener, to get to know myself and some experts that I work with, collaborate with, or want to work with, depending on the scenario. So just get a behind-the-scenes look and see that we're real people. Today's guest, Bill Fitzsimmons. Bill is the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Men and Families Alberta, or CCMF Alberta, as it's known, since May of 2023. He's been around Calgary for quite a while, since 2000. He's married with grandchildren, and he's been all over the world doing all kinds of good things, from Habitat for Humanity to other nonprofits, raising funds. And he's worked his way up through that system, if you will, to become the head of CCMF Alberta today. So I wanted to bring Bill on to feature the good work that CCMF Alberta is doing. I'm based here in Calgary currently, so that's my connection to this organization here. And we'll hear more from Bill, as we go through the conversation about different good things that they're doing. But the way that I first found out about CCMF was a few years ago. My girlfriend was working for a law firm, and she was facilitating webinars that the law firm partnered together with CCMF Alberta. And so we'll ask Bill about that a little bit later. But that's how I came upon it, and I think it's a great organization, and I want to share with you and encourage you to support the organization. So welcome to the podcast today, Bill Fitzsimmons.
Thanks, Cory. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you inviting me.
Awesome. Is there anything you want to fill in? And I did a very high level review of your bio there. Is there anything you want to fill in that's important for you that people know right now?
Well, I think it's important to know that I had a long business career, and at a certain point in that career, I recognized that I wanted to do something that was more in the social services area, and subsequently went and did a master's degree at Trinity Western University in the not-for-profit leadership management. So that combination of business background and the formal training in not-for-profit has served me really well, and it's been a satisfying combination.
That's fantastic. I think that's one of the things that sets me apart as a financial advisor, is that I have a lot of experience running businesses and owner operating and working in the business world. So I've been through all the things that everyday entrepreneurs and business owners have been through. So I think from your perspective, it's fantastic that you have that background that helps you not just know how to raise money, how to run a nonprofit, but also how business works and how efficiencies and processes and all these things will come together to help CCMF Alberta become a really well-run organization. So good for you on that. That's awesome. Yeah. So I mentioned you've been in Calgary here since 2000, a few years before me. I came in 2014. But where did life start for you, Bill? And I'm curious how that beginning, those surroundings, whatever that was, how that shaped who you were, like as you began your journey into adulthood and towards the man you are today.
Well, my story is a little bit interesting. I was actually born in Ireland and came over to Canada when I was quite young with my parents, and in a number of places in Canada. We started in Ontario in Deep River in the Ottawa Valley, and then we moved to Manitoba when I was 11 and finished high school and early university in Manitoba, and then subsequently moved to northern BC and then eventually the lower mainland of BC. Spent over 20 years there before landing in Calgary. So I think, when you talk about what shaped me as an individual, I think some of that is just being exposed to a variety of different Canadian subcultures, if you will, We tend to think of our country as being relatively homogeneous, but there's definitely specific nuances within the different areas of Canada. So, I mean, I see myself very much as a Canadian living in Alberta. I'm proud to be an Albertan, but I'm equally proud to be a Canadian. And I think being a Canadian has really imbued that sense of social responsibility. I think that's something we Canadians embrace perhaps as much or more than most nations and nationalities, that sense that we have a responsibility to give back to the society that we're part of, the world that we're part of.
Absolutely. That is very true. I met someone about 5 years ago who worked for a national company here in Canada, and she traveled all across the country training people. And we had a good long conversation about how different parts of the country all have their own unique flavor to how people are and how they treat each other and how they treat visitors and this kind of thing. And every province has its own unique subculture, like you say, right? So that's interesting. And coming from a place where you've lived in a bunch of different places, I've traveled quite a bit too. And it does give you a different perspective on yourself, on other people, on people with different backgrounds and different ways of looking at the world, for sure. I can see how that would be valuable to you to bring that to CCMF Alberta. So when you were growing up, you moving around a bit there, what did you want to be, or what did you imagine you would be when you grew up? And, where did that journey start for you?
Apart from being a hockey star, you mean?
Yeah, of course.
Like every Canadian boy.
Right, of course.
But I'm only 5'5", and I was about like 130 pounds in grade 12. So I think my hockey career got a little bit curtailed by that. But I think my parents were a big influence on me. My father was very involved in community initiatives. He was a longtime Boy Scout leader. He got involved in the Lions Club and their Easter Seals camp and program. And I think just that sense that I got from my parents of giving back to the community and the compassion that they had for other people, I think that was probably the biggest influence in my life.
Interesting. And so is that what kind of led you to want, or towards ending up doing nonprofit work? Was it sort of your dad's involvement in the Boy Scouts and the Easter Seals and that sort of thing?
Well, I don't think it was conscious in that regard. I think it was just that influence of growing up in an environment where, people cared about other people. I always had a sense of wanting to be involved with something that was a little bit more of a mission and not just a job. I had a very satisfying business career, had a lot of accomplishments, had a lot of great colleagues. And, I feel really good about that career. But at the same time, I felt a sense that there was a need to do something that was a little bit more sustainable socially. And that's what led me to do my master's degree initially. The challenge of the not-for-profit industry, of course, is that it's relatively lower paid than business. So it took me a while before I could really get myself in a position financially where I could focus more on that not-for-profit world. So initially I was, as a Rotarian, involved in development projects, clean water projects internationally. Locally, I was actually involved in championing some of the women's groups in Calgary, Women in Need Society, and other agencies like that. I was kind of the club champion for Rotary for those organizations, and that was very satisfying to help them get a little bit of funding and move their programs forward. Sometimes people are a little surprised when they hear that, because they say, well, how did you end up in a men's serving agency?
Yeah,
which is a story in itself.
Yeah, well, we definitely want to hear that. That is, and one thing I thought of too when I read your bio was like, oh, that's interesting. It's service, right? So it's not out of left field entirely. But why don't we talk about that now? We can come back to my questions later. They're maybe less important. How did that happen? I'm guessing from what you're saying, and were you doing this other volunteer work while you were in the corporate world? Is that what I'm hearing? Or yeah,
that's correct.
So it wasn't like you just turned a switch one day and all of a sudden you did all these,
No, it was. Deeds, I've been involved in community initiatives, really throughout my life, boards of sports organizations or community organizations. And as I say, as a Rotarian, we were doing a lot of different things in the community. What led me to CCMF was kind of interesting because it was actually my wife, who was also a Rotarian at the time, who made the comment, we do so much in Rotary for men and for children, or for women and children and other organizations. We don't seem to do anything for men at all, or they're not agencies or organizations that serve men that we should be looking at. And she took it upon herself to start searching. And what she discovered very quickly was, no, there's not a lot of organizations out there that are supporting men, particularly in mental health field. And she also discovered at the same time that 3 out of 4 men are the suicide statistics in Canada. So 3 out of every 4 suicides in Canada are men. So that,
Right.
that's certainly a statistic that got my attention. And eventually Patricia, my wife, came upon CCMF and connected with my predecessor, Beth Barbary, who was the executive director. And we kind of connected, and I started to learn a little bit about, the men's world. And I mean, I'd heard about men's organizations in the past that didn't seem to be particularly appealing to me. They seemed to be almost a step backward from, the women's movement. And at CCMF, we're not an agency that's here to push back against the women's movement. We're here to raise the flag and say, hey, there's some things going on with men that we need to be more sensitive to. And, a lot of these issues around gender are a lot more nuanced than what we want to either admit or how they're portrayed in the media. So as I've learned more about CCMF, the high suicide rates, we deal with a lot of men who've gone through intimate relationship breakdowns. They're often involved in very high conflict divorces and separations, battles over child custody. I began to see my own life. My very best friend growing up committed suicide as a young man. We weren't in close contact at that time because he had moved, but that still shook me. And, even today, I wonder what was going on with Danny, that, he came to that point in his life. I also looked at, my family history and instances of a relationship breakdown and the incredible impact that had on children. And, I really began to realize that, relationship breakdown is an intergenerational, and that, if we don't do a better job of managing relationship breakdowns, managing the mental health of both women and men, and keeping parents actively engaged with the children, we're going to see more intergenerational effects, more relationship breakdowns, more inability to, form solid relationships on the part of those children. So just everything that I learned, kept reflecting back on my own life experiences, and just began to see some of the things that I had seen in my family and in my own life in a different perspective, not as part of a personal history, but part of a larger societal context. So I became more and more interested. And when my predecessor approached me with the idea of taking on this role, I certainly was interested in talking about it more. And a few years later, here I am.
There you go. Well, I'm sorry to hear about your friend. And I that's something that's very, I don't know how to put it. It's, I guess, close to my heart. I don't know how else to word it. It sounds fine to say it that way, but the idea of men, the risk of men and suicide, I've known, I thankfully haven't had a close friend go through that, but, I've had moments of struggle in my life, and I know other men who have, considered giving up hope, if we can say that. And so I understand that. I've also been through the training called ASSIST. You're probably familiar with it. I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's basically the way I explain it to people that aren't familiar with it is it's sort of like suicide first aid, right? It's like if someone's considering it, you're there with some skills and some training to help them, through that, right? So, and something actually, as we're talking about, I'm thinking I need to go and renew my certification on that, because it's a valuable thing. And, people can out of nowhere can approach you with the need, and it's good to be prepared. So that's interesting how that journey went for you. And as you're talking, I was remembering actually yesterday, knowing that I was going to be talking with you today, I was in a conversation with a couple of other people, a gentleman and a woman, and the gentleman was telling a story about a close friend of his who actually had been quite seriously, abused by his partner, physical abuse, and quite severe actually. And it's uncomfortable to hear that, and it's uncomfortable to know that and to think about it. And knowing that I was, coming to talk to you today, my mindset was kind of already geared towards, oh geez, that's terrible to hear that. And, the woman that was meeting with us as well, like her first instinct was almost to laugh at it. And like, of course she was mature enough to sort of realize what was going on and correct herself. But, the first instinct is, well, that's weird. How can a woman, the statistics more than me, you've heard the stories a lot more than me, but it made me think about, how unfamiliar it is to hear these stories and how foreign it almost sounds like a joke in a sense, because, well, how could that do that? Men are so much stronger than women. And can you maybe speak to that? Or how is it that so many men, because I understand it's about equal, the number of men that report or that experience partner violence. How is it that so many men experience that? Seems odd.
I think it's a fundamental question, and it has to do with a complex mix of the social messages we get about men and masculinity and manhood. We're still raised with this idea that men should be self-sustaining individuals, that we don't really need support and help. We're raised with this idea that men, have privilege in the world that women don't enjoy. We're raised with the conflicting notions that men need to be more open with their emotions, but every man will tell you that you are open about your emotions in certain contexts. It's going to be, if you're not mocked, it could hurt your career. It could damage you in a lot of ways. So, there's so many conflicting messages out there. Look at our iconic images. We have Captain America and all these different superheroes that are, totally self-reliant. And at the same time, as men, we've been encouraged to be more open with our emotions, to be more involved with our families. I was in a conference where a speaker pointed out that not many of those superheroes actually have families, which was an interesting observation. So there's a lot of conflicting messages, but there's a lot of shame involved for men in admitting that they're not invulnerable, they're not totally self-reliant, they have pain. And the difference between men and women is not in our feelings. Men have feelings. We're human beings. We act on those feelings and share those feelings in a very different way, and often we don't share them, and that's part of the problem. We also tend to have less of the support networks that women have. Men report being very isolated in today's society, and that gets worse for men as they get older. So, that's a big factor. Isolation certainly can lead to the kind of suicidal ideation and eventual acting on that. But, to talk to the specific incident you were talking about, and I've encountered this incredulity or even humor, and it's interesting if you look at our films and TV, violence against men is often played for comedy. It's funny to see a woman lash out at a man, and I've watched some entertainment with a very different perspective in the last 2 years, and watched and thought, that's an incredibly violent attack that's taking place, and it's being played for comedy. And it's almost like it's acceptable for a woman to act with violence against a man. Bit of an aside, incidentally, one of the statistics is that violence among teenage women is growing at a significant pace, the use of violence, not just against men, but against other young women as well. So, there's some concerning trends. But, the idea that a man can be abused by a woman because they're stronger, well, there's a couple of contexts to that. One is that even if somebody is, smaller than you physically, if they're trying to hurt you, it's very difficult to defend yourself. You ask a policeman what it's like to, defend yourself against a 130-pound person who's trying to do damage without leaving a mark on them, incidentally. Because, if you grasp a woman by the wrists, for example, to restrain her just to defend yourself, when the police show up and she's got marks on her wrist, there's a very good chance that you, as the male, is going to be taken into custody in that situation. So, there's a lot of nuances to this, but you've got to imagine for a moment that you're in a relationship with someone that you love, that you think loves you, and all of a sudden they physically strike you.
Mm.
We've seen this with abused women for many, many years. People say, well, why did she stay with him for so long? Why wouldn't she leave? Well, it's a psychology that you get involved in where you think you've done something wrong, and typically that partner will apologize profusely, say that they love you, and so it's a cycle, and often it's a very unhealthy codependent relationship that develops, and often the partner, whether it's a man or a woman that's doing the abuse, often they have their own traumas that they're dealing with, and it makes it difficult for them to be in a healthy relationship. It can be early childhood trauma. In some cases, it's also personality behaviors, borderline personality disorders that are very controlling and not capable of forming a healthy relationship. So there's all sorts of nuances.
Sure.
But for many men in this situation, it's the children that are the consideration for them in why they don't leave, because they don't want to leave their children in, what is a dangerous situation. If that woman is lashing out at them physically, then why would he believe that, the children are not potentially victims? And they often are, incidentally. So, the statistics on intimate partner violence are interesting. And when we talk about violence, it's good to talk about the full continuum. So, there's emotional violence, there's financial manipulation, there's institutional abuse where, one of the partners that feels wronged by this relationship will use the court system in particular the court system and the police to punish their partner for their alleged failure to, love them sufficiently, or, live up to, the idea that they had in mind for their relationship. So there's a lot of different types of abuse. But if you're talking physical abuse, the statistics are that almost equal numbers of men and women, this is Statistics Canada data, report experiencing physical abuse at the hands of a romantic partner. It's very close together, and men tend to underreport a little bit because of the shame and stigma attached. So, I think we can be fairly safe in saying that it's relatively close to 50-50. Now, just to be clear, when it comes to intimate partner violence, women are more likely to die at the hands of a romantic partner than a man. And I don't think we should, minimize that fact. You're 4 times more likely as a woman to die at the hands of a romantic partner than a man is. But the other statistic that's interesting, and there's constant research coming out as researchers delve into this more. So the current statistics would show that on the order of 57% of relationships that feature intimate partner violence, it's actually bidirectional violence. So both partners are violent towards the other. And I don't think that's the picture that we normally get through the media. And unfortunately, some elements of the women's movement have tended to, promote this idea that men are predators, women are victims, which is pretty insulting to both men and women in my view. But it's a very simplistic view of what is a very, very complex subject. So within the remaining partners where the abuse is one directional, about 30% of those are men who experience violence by a female partner. There's of course intimate partner violence within gay lesbian couples as well. So it's not just heterosexual couples. And then there's probably about twice the number of women as men that are, victims of male abuse, without them, being in any way abusive back. So, the statistics are much more complex and much more nuanced than what we typically hear. So, and again, we don't think any human being deserves to be a victim of abuse, whether it's physical, whether it's
Absolutely not.
emotional and financial. We're just simply as an organization holding up our hand and saying, hey, 3 out of 4 suicides are men. There's something going on with men and men's mental health that we need to address as a society. We know that children benefit greatly from having a father in their life, having a father and a mother in their life. A lot of intimate relationship breakdown leads to attempts to alienate one parent from the children. The children become the prize. And unfortunately, our family court system doesn't do a really good job of managing that. We have this system that's designed to pit two people against each other. So we know that the statistics show us that having two involved parents, even if they're not together, is enormously positive for children in terms of their emotional development, stability, their academic achievement, sports achievement, arts achievement. Every positive measure you could look at is enhanced by having both parents involved in the children's lives.
Right.
But if you look at the negative measures, when there's not two parents involved, likelihood of getting involved in crime, drug, substance abuse, prostitution, criminal behavior, all of those negative things that we don't want to see happen to our children are increased in likelihood when we don't have both parents involved. So, as an organization, that's one of the things we advocate for is equal shared parenting, unless it can be clearly proven that that's not in the best interest of the children. But the courts are supposed to act in the best interest of the children, and the statistics and research is very clear that the best interests of the children are served by having both parents involved. And funnily enough, children can have negative outcomes even when one of those parents has been abusive historically. But alienation from a parent, estrangement from a parent, has really significant psychological effects on children. And, so we need to be aware of those things. There's an interesting initiative right now. The Law Foundation of Alberta is funding an initiative at the University of Calgary, and it's the Faculty of Social Work and the Faculty of Law, looking at alternatives to family court that can help families settle relationship breakdowns and child custody issues in a more, less confrontational manner, and find alternatives to family court. Family court eats up a large part of the budget for law and court systems in Alberta. It's somewhere in the order of 40% of legal system costs are going into, family court related issues. So
Wow.
Even from the point of view of a taxpayer, you probably should be concerned about whether that's the right way to settle, people's interpersonal situations.
Well, and from my point of view, I'm not so much concerned about the cost of it as much as is it the best way to resolve it. It's good they're looking at alternative ways to resolve that, because the cost itself can be devastating to, as a financial advisor, to the financial health of the family, right? And one of my missions in life, and reason why I help business owners, is because the struggle of running a business can often lead to the breakdown of the family. And that can come with it. We've heard stories about it, in the rural communities, about sort of farm life and how stressful that is, and how that can lead to, certain types of inter-partner violence and things like that. But my perspective is that if the business is healthy and strong and growing and profitable, that takes a tremendous amount of financial and with it emotional pressure off the couple, right? And off the whole family. And it doesn't mean that the family's going to be perfect or free of any other troubles, but it certainly takes that one thing. Finance is a big cause of relational family breakdown that can lead to things like stress leads to acting out and, outbreaks of violence included. And so that's one reason why I focus on, because as a business owner, I relate there, right? So So that's one of my missions. Having said that, I do also concurrently understand that sometimes two people should not be together. Like, it's for the health of themselves and even the children. Like, it's best if they part ways. But I like the idea that, like what you're saying, I've heard this statistic of the importance of the father's presence in the life of the children, how much that stabilizes the health of the children as they grow into adulthood, right? So you mentioned things like crime, the effects of crime on the children. I mean, even without going to the point of crime, just the unhealthy ways in which children grow up thinking about relationships and thinking about themselves and other people and how you treat each other and all these things, right? That is another negative side effect of the breakdown of the family, right? So there's lots to it, absolutely. And I really appreciate the work you guys are doing. I did want to ask you, well, it's a couple of things. One is, as you were talking, it made me think about this book that I've read. You're probably familiar with it, is No More Mr. Nice Guy. If you're not, I'll give you a copy, but it's basically, in a nutshell, for those listening or watching and haven't heard of it, it's a book written by a psychologist who, through his own experience and the experience of counseling men primarily, he discovered this Mr. Nice Guy syndrome, that it mostly applies to men, can also apply to women. And what it is, basically, if I got it right, is rather than share negative feelings honestly with other people, you stuff them down and you basically pretend you're a nice guy, right? And so some of the nicest people that present as a Mr. Nice Guy actually have this sort of bubbling frustration and sometimes even to the point of rage inside of them. And then if that gets to a point where they don't feel they can express it safely, they don't have people around them, like you mentioned earlier, they can talk to and interact with and express and figure some of this stuff out, it can turn into an explosion one day, which can be equal to partner violence.
Certainly squares with what I know about male behavior and the acceptability of expressing emotions, especially in certain situations. So, not familiar with the book, but it's certainly, I'd be interested in seeking that out for sure. You touched on one thing that I want to just go back to, Cory, because I think it's important. You talked about the struggle to build a business and the emotional and time toll and the toll it takes on families. And I would expand that further and talk about, just men pursuing a career in general. We tend to think of men pursuing their career, because it's glamorous and wonderful and they get to travel and we see other men that are doing the fly in, fly out lifestyle, places like Fort McMurray in particular comes to mind. All of those things are attempts by men to provide for their families in a lot of cases. And I mean, I can tell you from personal experience that traveling on business gets old in a real hurry, but you do it because, you want to bring a good living home for your family. And we think that in this age of the equality of women and women holding down careers, that men don't have the responsibility that they did for providing for the family. But it's wrong in terms of our societal expectations. 70% of North Americans still say that the man is the primary one responsible for family income. So that's still a deeply held social belief. And often, if one of the parents is going to stay home with the children, it's more likely to be the woman. I mean, it's not the norm or the rule necessarily, but it's more likely. So it's often the man that is sacrificing time away from the family to, ensure the economic health of the family. And most fathers do it willingly, but at the same time, it takes a toll on family relations, takes a toll on the relationship between a man and a woman, or two women or two men in relationships. So I think that aspect of the impact that has on relationships, we need to talk about that more often and more frequently. But also, individuals in relationship need to talk about it and express how they're feeling about it more. And, families should be more prepared to have discussions about, what's enough in terms of income, where it's a situation And I'll use my own life as an example. I had an opportunity to go to Boston and take a fairly senior marketing position in the organization I was working for. But I went down and looked at the situation. We would have had to have lived at least an hour outside of Boston to make it affordable, even on a
Mhm.
significantly increased salary. And, I looked at, me commuting 2 hours a day, traveling extensively on a higher paid position. I just didn't think the price that we would pay as a family was worth it, and we
Mm.
made a different decision. And I think it's important for families to have those discussions and make those kinds of judgments more often. I think it's also important for employers to be a little bit more sensitive to what they're asking of their employees in those situations, because you run the risk of losing, really good productive employees if you don't manage some of those situations. So I think as a society, you know, it's we're a very materialistic society in many ways. We want the houses, the toys, the boats and cars, all of those things, but sometimes we don't stop to weigh the cost
Yeah,
to our families, the cost to our relationships.
absolutely. And I could literally talk about this all day because it's central to what I do and who I am as a financial advisor. And I will say as briefly as I can that a big part of the reason why I focus on helping business owners and why part of my mission is to help business owning families from imploding due to the struggles is because my own family has imploded twice. I've been through two divorces, and in both cases, there's lots of factors on both sides, but I think a large part of the challenge in each relationship was the vast difference in my strong drive to be entrepreneurial, right? To pursue a dream and an idea. And a lot of business owners have that. That's what motivates them and keeps them going forward. And the spouse, if they don't share that vision as it relates to the family, they may sacrifice and they feel like, well, I've took a job I didn't love or a job I hate because we need benefits for the kids or this sort of thing. And the way I put it to people is business struggles for too long without a resolution or a transformation. Eventually that relationship between the couple will deteriorate. It turns from tolerance to frustration to eventually bitterness. And then it's usually too late. And so part of what I want to say is how I help those business owners with about 40 different partners that I use to help me help business owners is understand and overcome the specific business challenges that they're facing. And I say that to say that they don't have to do that alone. They don't have to struggle alone. If they're struggling in their business, they don't have to do that alone. And as a business owner, former business owner, entrepreneur, I understand those struggles. And so I'm a good sounding board for them to talk to and express those things. And I can introduce them to people that can help them solve those problems. So including, how to communicate in your spouse, confidence, all the different things that go along with being the full human being that you want to be, right? I just want to touch on that because I think it relates directly to what we're talking about. So people can hear more about that from me in other forums. But I did want to talk about the services that you offer because we talked about isolation and you and I previously had chatted about how when men first come to your organization, you talked about the shame, right? They like an opportunity to step out if it's a bit too much at first, right? So a lot of them like the virtual part of connecting with you guys. But can you just summarize or actually as much detail as you want? What are some of the virtual services that you offer and what are some of the in-person services you offer? Because I think that's super valuable too.
Thanks, Corey. A good segue into what we do when it comes to supporting relationship breakdown and particularly men. Our program kind of breaks down into four areas. So the first area is what we would call mental wellness, certainly a key area for us. So within mental wellness, we offer individual counseling. We do that on a sliding scale basis so that, no man, is denied counseling because they're not able to afford it. Men that have, health insurance will ask them to, use their health insurance to pay for counseling. Men that don't have that facility or have used it up, we'll look at their financial circumstances and work out something. We also use, practicum counseling students, which is essentially a low to no cost alternative as well. We also do men's peer support groups, which is really valuable. It gives men an opportunity to come together, break down some of that isolation, recognize that what they're going through is not unique, that other men have had similar experiences, have the same feelings, by the way. You're not unique as a man if you're feeling that way. They get a chance to see men who have progressed through, having been through the crisis and worked through it, and they're coming out the other side. So men's peer support groups are incredibly empowering, and they just create a space for men to come and share what's really going on it's a risk-free environment because we meet men with compassion. There's no judgment of your circumstances and situation. We want to help you regain your strength and your own self-determination. All of our programs have a strength-based component to it where we want you to regain your own agency to move on with your life. So that's the mental wellness piece. We also have a trauma recovery program within that's very specifically designed around trauma. Many men don't understand what trauma is. They don't recognize they've been traumatized by their situation. So this is a very structured 13-week program that takes them through recognizing trauma, recognizing their own trauma, starting to understand what they can do about trauma, avoiding recreating, negative behaviors and relationships that may have occurred in the past. Beyond the mental wellness, we have a lifestyle and parenting program. So we teach men how to be effective fathers, all aspects from nutrition to recreation to, managing your own emotions, just practical advice across anything that would impact parenting in general. We also run the Triple P parenting program, which is an 8-week structured program, teaches you to set boundaries and do appropriate discipline, stands for the Positive Parenting Program. It's an internationally recognized standard, and it's a really valuable piece for fathers to really understand parenting and setting expectations with their children, setting boundaries and reasonable positive discipline. It also helps in high conflict co-parenting situations to have those skills. We also offer a coaching program within the life skills, and the coaching program is really geared on setting life goals, specifically around relationships and moving yourself forward. So probably a lot of parallels with what you do in your coaching career, but it's a little bit more focused on relationship and, moving forward in an emotionally sound way with someone who keeps you accountable for those steps. The third area that we are involved in is our legal program. In partnership with Charles Fair and Fair Legal, we provide monthly webinars on different aspects of the family court system so that, people get a chance to understand the family court system and different specific parts of the family court system. We delve into detail, and it can be something like, what's important when you have to provide documentation to the courts. Another time it might be what is arbitration and what's involved and why might you be sent to arbitration. So, a variety of all aspects of the family court system. We also provide some one-on-one legal consultations we have a couple of lawyers in our legal stable now, so we can offer free consultations. A lot of the men that we see come to us because of their financial situation, they're self-representing in court, and that's a pretty daunting thing to do, particularly if you're facing someone who has, a legal aid lawyer or other legal support. So we try and provide some skills and some knowledge to those individuals. The final fourth program we have is an interim housing facility. We just opened this in November of 2024. One of the challenges for men who have children and they need to get those children out of a dangerous situation, maybe there's alcohol or other substance abuse taking place, but whatever the reasons, they have their children in tow. There aren't many facilities for men with children. So the most likely outcome is that children end up in foster care, men end up in the homeless population and homeless shelters. That's not a desirable situation for either of the parties. So our facility allows men to bring their children into a family unit, keep the family together, keep the children together with one loving parent, and we provide wraparound services, everything that I just talked about, to those individuals. Now, we're in the process of creating some units that would accommodate single men, because we hear a lot of stories about men, suddenly their relationship broken down, they're asked to leave the family home. Sometimes they're ordered out of the family home, and they're living in their car because they don't have the financial means to pay for alternate accommodation. So we provide in our housing program typically 90 days, up to 90 days of accommodation at no cost. So they get a chance to stabilize emotionally, figure out their livelihood, figure out schools, look for permanent housing solutions, all of the things that come around with kind of recreating your life. So, we're pretty happy about that facility, although it's not going to probably accommodate nearly the number of men that we have about 500 clients a year coming to CCMF Alberta now. So, our facility probably right now would accommodate, 7 men along with their children. So, just a small piece of the solution.
Wow. It's a small piece, but a potently valuable piece, especially for those men and those children that can benefit from that. That's amazing. And as you were starting to share about your services, I wrote down emergency housing because I wanted to remember to ask you about that. So I'm glad you didn't forget. I shouldn't have thought you might not bring that up. So yeah, that's fantastic. And you and I have chatted offline about a couple of situations that I'm aware of that might be able to help with that. I think that's something that, there's lots of services that you offer that I'd like to boost any way that I can. They're all valuable. Some in particular, I think I might be able to even help you with as time goes on, and we'll talk offline about that if that's something you want to do. But
appreciate.
Well, in different ways, these different factors that your clients are facing are things that I've dealt with personally in the past or have witnessed close friends go through. So, like I mentioned, I haven't had a close friend that I know of, at least, come face to face with suicide. None of them have sort of made that ultimate choice, thank God. But it's still something that is very important to me. And, I want to bring light to this whole topic because of all the reasons that we've talked about here and all the statistics. And I don't want to see any of my friends or anyone I know be a statistic of these sorts, right? I originally wanted to feature CCMF, but my original thought for a conversation was sort of like the journey of your life and how you've transformed from where you were as a kid. I dreamed of being an astronaut one day, a lawyer the another day, a policeman, a fireman, cowboy, hockey player. Didn't become any of those. But my point is that there is a transformation possible for anybody that wants a different kind of life and a different outcome for their life. And you guys tangibly help men and through the fathers, the children, to experience that in a really positive way. And I love that. And for those that knew me 20 years ago and hated me, I'm a very different person today. You might still hate me, but I'm a very different person. And I believe that I hate when I hear people say, oh, people don't change. People change every day. I'm a testament to that. And I want to encourage other people that it is possible for them too. So
we see some very positive stories, from individuals that went through high conflict relationship breakdown and very contentious, separations, divorces, battles over the kids. And now they're co-parenting in a very positive and effective manner. So, it isn't the end of the road, but, for a lot of men, it seems, it just seems like their life has imploded. And, without getting into some of the uglier parts, our court system has a lot to answer for in terms of the emotional toll, for men in the courts. We're judged very differently. We're held to a very different standard in the courts. And, there is institutional bias within our court system that disadvantages men. And that's not the worst part. The worst part is that ultimately impacts the children. And the courts are supposed to act in the best interest of the children. And we need to see courts doing that more consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I just thought of as you were sharing that, I'd like to share it because I think someone out there needs to hear this, is that when I was a kid, my dad traveled for work. Like you were talking about earlier, he traveled 2 to 3 nights a week. He was away traveling for work, like you said, to support the family. And growing up, my dad was quick to rage and he lashed out, and he got better as he got more mature, thank God. But as a kid, we had one perspective on my dad and a different perspective on my mom, the nurturer, et cetera, right? While both my parents have passed away now, so I can say this, is that being an adult now and talking with my brothers and understanding our parents from a different perspective, we see now that the struggles that dad went through and how hard he tried to be a good dad and be a good role model and be a good provider and all these things. And nothing against my mom. I love my mom, but she had her own things that she was dealing with and figuring out and goals and this and that affected the relationship from her perspective. Right. So I see things differently now than I did when I was a child. And if you're a young adult now and you're thinking about what your parents have recently gone through, be patient, give your mom and your dad some grace while you go through life and figure out what life is about, because 10, 20 years from now, you'll probably see them both differently. And they're both humans with their own struggles and challenges and things they're trying to figure out, and limited resources and mentors and all these things, right? So I'm super thankful for what you guys offer. I want to be respectful of your time because we've gone over an hour in the recording, and I think we could probably talk for many hours about all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I hope you'll come back again soon and we can flush some of this out more.
Yeah, I would love it. And thanks so much
Awesome.
for creating this opportunity for us to talk a little bit about CCMF Alberta and what we do. Appreciate your support.
For sure. So before we go, how can people reach you or reach CCMF to learn more, get involved, access the services? What should people do?
CCMFalberta.ca is the best way to reach us. It's better than trying to phone us or email us, because if you get on the site and you click Need Help, you can fill out the form that goes directly into our National Intake Center, and you should get a call in no longer than 48 hours. So probably quicker than that. So definitely the website's the quickest way to connect with us.
That's great, Bill. And I will put up a slide with, of course, if anyone is immediately facing feelings or threat of suicide right now, please stop this recording and call 911.
Yeah.
Okay?
Or call 988 or 211
988
Center.
Exactly. Thank you. I wasn't sure those numbers, but I was going to find them out and post as well. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And absolutely reach out to Bill and to CCMF Alberta. You can also reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with resources I have and or connect you through to them, whatever's appropriate. It's been great having you today, Bill, and I look forward to future conversations online and offline and seeing how I can help you guys. And look forward to hopefully long and fruitful collaboration, as you mentioned earlier. So again, thanks for your time today, and cheers, everyone.
Thank you so much, Cory.
Awesome.